The church.
The church did. Well, the Greeks had lyceums. They had gymnasiums, lyceums, and schola, which are all different kind of entities. But they really never had a higher learning. The first people to set up higher learning was the church. Why? Why did the church set up places to learn more learning?
Because you can't know everything.
Why? Why was it so important to the church?
Spread the word.
Why?
Seeking truth.
Seeking truth. The church, remember, what is the origin of the Christian church? Christian church came out of the Greeks and Hebrew thought. And as I've showed you in class after class, the New Testament is all written in Greek. The thinkers of the early church thought in terms of Greek. That's why we think the way we think. And so therefore, the very first universities gave degrees in theology. And then they broke it into pieces. And what were the two pieces they broke their training into? Anyone want to venture a guess? If you remember Martin Luther, you might guess.
Knowledge and theology?
Well, everybody got a degree in theology. Law and law and medicine. Okay? So you got a degree in, you got a THD, Doctor of Theology. Okay? And then later it was broken into law and medicine, and that was around, the period when it was done this, when they did this, was just before Martin Luther. Okay, does anybody want to venture the guess? I got it right here on the board. You could put it together. What does law have to do with? Legal and historical. What does medicine have to do with?
Scientific.
Church did this, guys. The church broke the degrees, the advanced degrees, into law and medicine. America, until the turn of the century in America, every lawyer in America got their undergraduate was in theology. Lincoln, the president, okay, first Republican president of the United States of America who freed the slaves through the Civil War. His first degree was in theology, and his advanced degree was in law. Now this existed for a long period of time because the church first of all controlled all the universities, which is probably very appropriate, but then much later, when the universities became secular, do you know what they next broke it out into? What was the next big break? What do you think?
Science and art.
No? What happened was the Germans in the Age of Enlightenment, when was the Age of Enlightenment? Anybody want to venture a guess? The beginning of the 1800s, and usually the Age of Enlightenment is considered, the end of the 1700s into the beginning of the 1800s, about 1830 or so. So, guess what very important thing happened in the Age of Enlightenment?
We get people in the United States.
The American Revolution happened, and by the way, all the fathers of the American Revolution were Age of Enlightenment thinkers. And in the Age of Enlightenment, which also affected the Germans and the rest of the world very effectively, because remember, what other revolution happened in that period? The French Revolution, right? And so what we saw in the Age of Enlightenment was the Germans began to break philosophy out of theology. Now, why would they do that? And by the way, it's good Lutherans who caused a lot of this problem. Well, I won't go into huge detail about it, but in this period, this is the period of the Tübingen School. And in the Tübingen School period, this was a period when empirical science, for example, one of the big sciences, well, anybody remember what happened, what big science was coming of age in the 1830s? Archaeology. And when they started doing archaeology, it was the beginnings of archaeology, and what did they not find that they expected to find right away? They expected to find immediate evidences of Old Testament and New Testament type archaeological events. And they didn't. So for example, Babylon was relegated to myth for a long period, as so was Troy. Troy and Babylon and Pompeii and, you know, you name it, a lot of places were relegated to myth. Because why?
Didn't find it.
They didn't find empirical data in the scientific method or the legal historical method that they could. Actually, there was some historical method, but the problem was that there was a huge fight at the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment, from the Age of Reason. And you remember what that fight was? In the Age of Reason, what was the fight? Which is more important? Empiricism in terms of scientific method, or empiricism in terms of legal historical method? And guess who won? The scientific methoders won. Now, today we have found great archaeological evidence of Babylon, of Troy, of Pompeii, of, you know, we've got Pilate's name, you know, we have Elba, we found, you know, basically Sodom and Gomorrah on other texts, in the Elba text. So all of these things that were relegated to myth at the beginning of archaeological science in the 1830s suddenly have become knowledge and true, right, in terms of empirical knowledge. But in the 1830s, they didn't know that. So what did they do? What did the Germans feel that they had to do between theology and philosophy?
Divide the known from the unknown.
Divide the known from the unknown. By the way, this is the beginning of the era when we started dividing fiction from nonfiction. Because before, what did we assume about fiction and nonfiction? Self-evident. Until you get to Daniel Defoe or Cervantes. Cervantes, remember? What's his name? Who's Don Quixote. The first real novel in Europe, Don Quixote, and then Daniel Defoe, the first real novel in the English language. And Daniel Defoe wrote. It looked like an autobiography, didn't it? A journal, but it wasn't. And so we had to invent a new word, and the word was fiction. And so in this period, we also started separating fiction from nonfiction, and therefore the Germans started it, and they divided Philosophia, a doctor of philosophy, from a doctor of theology. And all the empirical sciences fell under philosophy. And all the what sciences fell under theology. All the religious bits. And so this is just historical stuff. This is how we got to where we are. Now, the problem is, we have a problem. And the problem is this. Is there a problem in understanding the world that is philosophy only in terms of legal, historical, and scientific method? Yeah?
Yeah, it can change as new data becomes available.
Well, I don't worry so much about the change, because you're right. You know, I have a textbook on astronomy from the 1920s, and it talks about the aether. And of course, there is no such thing as the aether, but it was a philosophy, a hypothesis that was disproven with relativity theory and, actual, knowledge of space. So yeah, knowledge changes, but knowledge, this is what always gets me. Why don't they teach kids about evolution and about, for example, green science or environmental science when they don't even have a clue what F equals MA is? I mean, why would you even teach a child about pollution when they can't even understand the chemicals involved in the pollution? That's almost retarded. You need to teach children the basics of science before you begin to try to give them interpretive science on things they can't even understand. You see what I'm saying? Because 90% of the people in our country can't understand F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. So how do they understand even how an engine works? Or even how the chemical process of an engine works, right? So you really have to know the basis for this thing. But beyond that, what's the problem with viewing the world only from the legal, historical, and the scientific method? We kind of already talked about it. It's already been kind of brought up. What things can we not... Matter of fact, Brett mentioned it, but he didn't go far enough. Tell me the things that I can't know that science has given to me as new knowledge that makes it really difficult to use empirical science.
The atom.
The atom. Ooh,
Well, the whole
the atom is great. Because the atom, now I may be telling you new stuff. The atom is not a little electron buzzing around a nucleus, okay? The electron is based, and this is kind of one of my fields because my undergraduate is in chemistry. And so one of the things we did was Heisenberg theory. Heisenberg theory says that the electron can be anywhere. Okay, here's your nucleus, all right? And here's your electron. By the way, both are waves. Both are waves that happen to be particles at the same time. But the electron, where can it be? This is a hydrogen, this is a proton and a hydrogen atom. This is a proton and a hydrogen atom. So, tell me.
Statistically within a sphere, a
No.
ring.
No.
Or
Not statistically within a sphere. The Heisenberg equation tells us where can that electron be?
Anywhere it wants to be.
Anywhere in the universe it wants to be. Now the probability is that at any point in time you will find it within a sphere of a certain degree around the electron, around the proton. But the reality is that it can be anywhere in the universe. This is hard to grasp. Very difficult to grasp. This is the Heisenberg equation of basic atomic physics. That's a problem, isn't it? How about another one? Give me another one. I mean, it comes right out of this. How about probability mechanics? Probability? Because probability theory is required to generate a Heisenberg. And how about this? How about chaos math? I use this all the time. Chaos math? What's chaos math? Chaos math allows us to actually do computations on things that are outside the realm of normal mathematics. But even more than that, what about mathematics? Are mathematics covered by scientific method?
Well, they're used in the scientific.
They're used in the scientific method all the time. But are they part of the scientific method?
No.
They're not. Now, why do I say they're not? In the scientific method, if I take a ball and I drop it every time, I expect that ball to drop at a certain velocity, a certain acceleration, right? But every time I drop it, it's unique. Every time I drop it, matter of fact, every time the ball is unique every time because what happens to what happens to the mass of that ball?
constantly changing.
It's constantly changing, increasing or decreasing. And when I drop it, I could never, ever, ever drop that ball from the exact same location every time, right? It's a theory. I'm working with theories here. Only theories. In mathematics, 1 plus 1 always equals 2 as long as what?
You're in base 10.
Well, if I'm in base 10, but there's more to it than that. Where does this come from? And you guys got to remember that. Well, maybe you don't. Those of us who were maybe baby boomers, everybody who had set theory, raise your hand if you had set theory. Come on, more of you guys had to have set theory, because set theory is what they always started your textbooks with, right? Your math textbooks. Set theory really says that set A plus a union of set B equals A, I can't remember the symbol, but it was something A union B or whatever. Anyway, I can only add them if what?
If they intersect or if they're in the same set or something like that?
Yeah. So for example, apples and oranges. If I can add apples and oranges if I'm talking about the set of fruits, but I can't add apples to oranges if I'm talking about apples or oranges, right? That's the old adage. Even more than that, if I take one apple plus one apple, do I really have two of the same set? Only if I do what?
Define the set as being all apples or something.
Define the set as being all apples. Because if I have a Macintosh apple and a Granny apple, they look different, right? But they're still, if I define it, they're still apples. Here's a problem the Greeks had, and it's the same problem we have. What is a chair? Well, that's a chair. But what about a throne? What about the pews? Is that a chair? Every chair, chairs can be radically different. It could be a pillow. I mean, there's a chair, right? Is that a chair?
Not one I'll ever get back out of.
There you go. So when I talk about the set of chairs in this room, if I asked you, all of you guys, to add up all the chairs in this room, I mean, I could sit on that. Is that a chair?
No.
Well, why not? If I define a chair as anything I can sit on, the floor is a chair.
Yes.
Do you see the problem here? What is mathematics?
Defining the sets.
Mathematics is not governed by empirical scientific method, because 1 plus 1, if the sets are defined, always equals 2. It is not empirical. It is always defined. It's not legal historical either, is it? Because it's not unique in the sense that it's not unique in time. Every time I do a mathematical equation, I will always get the same, except in probability theory and chaos math, but that's a different problem, all right? But what does that mean? Look at our diagram. Where does mathematics lie?
It's not physical.
It's not physical. Mathematics lies in the realm of philosophia, but outside the realm of the physical world. Now tell me, riddle me this. What do I use to prove mathematics? Logic. This is where all this leads to. Now you guys are in the class, because in every class I teach, I always talk about legal historical method and scientific method, because those are methods we use empirically within the physical world. But if we want to talk about these issues that I've listed, what do we have to get into? Logic. Now, the reason I brought up all this math stuff is because if I take a simple mathematical logical equation, A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. That does not exist in legal historical method, it does not exist in the scientific method, it exists only in logic. It is, that's exactly precise. I just heard that comment over here at this table. When we talk about mathematics and we talk about logic, we are talking about if you can prove something in mathematics using logic, then what can you prove?
True.
What kind of truth? This is the assertion of the Greeks. The Greeks invented logic. The Greeks invented logic, and we usually tag the time for the invention around 300 BC, 399 BC, 400 BC, the death of Socrates. The reason that's tagged at that time is because Socrates is the father of logic, considered kind of the father of logical method in Greek. The point is that if I can use logic to prove mathematical constructs that are outside of the physical world, I can also use logic to prove what?
Things within the construct of the physical.
Well, I wouldn't say that, because I would always use, if I wanted to, I would use it for legal historical scientific method. But what things can I prove? If I have a method of proving stuff that does not exist in the physical world, what are those things outside the physical world? We talked about it. Emotions, thoughts, spiritual things. Do you see why theology was grouped with philosophy by the Greeks and by theological universities for what, 1,500 years or so? Do you see why? Because if you use logic, you can prove things outside of the physical world. Yes, ma'am.
Is abstraction abstract? Is it physical?
No. That's the point. If you cannot prove it, and I'm hoping I'm using the same definition as you are for abstractions. or abstract. But anything that you can't, the test is this. If you can use the legal historical or the scientific method to prove it, it's physical. If you can't use them, you have to use logic.
Which opens up the cosmos.
Which opens up the cosmos at least to philosophia. Because outside of philosophia is what?
That which we cannot know.
That which we cannot know that's within creation. This is really cool because it fits within Christian theology very well. Because there are things about God that we assert you cannot know. There's things about the cosmos, the created universe, that man cannot fathom. But yet the Greeks, and I agree with this 100%. I mean, no one has to agree with anything. But I'm not telling you opinion. I'm just stating what is obviously by definition an absolute fact within this construct. We use a legal, historical, and scientific method to prove physical reality. If you invent a method, tell us, because nobody knows another. We use logic to prove those things outside of physical reality.
Is the cosmos finite?
The cosmos is finite because it is a created universe.
Okay, so based on the evolution of truth or the obtainable knowledge, then the sphere of philosophy continues to grow and the cosmos volume continues to shrink. Is that correct?
No. The Greeks would say, now this is an unassertable, I can't assert this as truth. No one can assert this as truth. His opinion is as valid as anyone's. However, the Greeks, by definition, would say that the philosophia is as large as it can be, and our knowledge grows. In other words, this is the limit, the absolute limit of human knowledge. And the limit
so
right
the
now.
sphere you have there is not what we know today,
Right.
but what we're ever capable of knowing.
Yeah, here's the limit of our knowledge for physical world, and here's our limit of knowledge, because remember, these are you could call them semi-infinite. You know, it's like the universe. The universe is infinite but semi-infinite. I mean, that gets really deep, okay? That's something that actually you have to go through a huge proof text to prove. But, you know, in other words, this is what we know right now, but our knowledge is limited. There is some limit to what we can know about the cosmos. Okay. And there is also some limit that we can know about the physical world, the physical reality also. Now, you might assert that we are always chasing a limit function. In other words, we will never get to the point where we know everything, right? Which is cool, either individually or collectively. But in any case, the question or the point here is that we use logic. We use logic to define and refine and to understand these things outside of the physical world. Which means that if we apply logic to these thoughts or ideas, we theoretically, right now let's talk theory, we theoretically can find truth in them, right? We start with, for example, legal, historical, and scientific method to determine what we know about them in the physical world, empirically. And then we use logic to do what? To extend our knowledge as far as we can. Now, the truth is that about all these subjects that we have here, there is no way that we can answer every question about these. Eventually, you reach a point of the points that you can prove. I mean, really what you can prove is, what you can prove is truth. Like I told you, 95% is facts. That is legal, historical, scientific method. About 5% is 94%, so we add up right. 94% are facts. About 5% is logic. And then 1% is opinion. But that opinion is, what do we call the opinion? What is the science of opinion outside of facts? Anyone know what it's called? It's called, and the Greeks have a beautiful word for it, ethics. We will not be covering ethics. Why? Why not cover ethics?
Everybody has different.
Not logical.
They change and.
Ethics is not based in logic. Now, the point is this. After we look at each of our subject matter, for example, if we look at, let's say we look at life issues. You know, one of the first ones we look at is life issues and medical issues. If we load up our, what can we know from the physical world? We load up what we can know from empirical sources, that is legal, historical, and scientific method. We load up our knowledge, and then we go what? We go into logic. We apply some logic to it, and we prove those things that we can prove. Then what can we do from an ethics standpoint? If we base our decisions, if we base our opinions on the truth that we determine, what have we just done in ethics?
Set up a rule.
Set up a code of conduct, a code of ethics.
Exactly. That is precisely correct. In other words, and this is what the Greeks said. This was the Greeks' continual yearning to what they call diakosune, that is equity. That what they would do is they would learn everything they could about truth using the methods. And then once they had the knowledge that they needed, then they would apply it to ethics. You see, the problem in the modern world isn't that you can't know truth. The problem in the modern world in terms of ethics is what?
Don't take the time to establish the facts.
Well, even when the facts are known, what do people tend to want to do?
Well, spin doctrine.
What do they do? Ignore them. Right?
They don't agree with them.
Right. Well, the problem isn't that they can't agree. Well, like for example, flat earthers. Okay, you have flat earthers. There are actually people out there that say the earth is flat. I'm not kidding. There's even a web page. Okay, and they're not tongue in cheek. They really believe the earth is flat. So what have they done?
Ignore the truth.
They've ignored the truth that is evident within empirical methods. This is what we are going to do. We are going to look at each of these subjects. We're going to apply legal, historical, scientific method to them to determine what we know empirically is true within the physical world. Then we will take logic, and next week what I'll do is I'm going to go through the construct of logic. I'm going to show you how we set up a logical problem and how you solve a logical problem. How you achieve an answer in truth to a logical question. And then in each class, what we will do is we will do exactly this. We will apply the legal historical method, the scientific method, and we will apply logic to know truth of what we can prove about each subject. And then, the other part, your homework, would be then what? What do you do with it? That's right. You go home and you think ethically, where do you stand? And I'm going to tell you right now, that in general you're going to find that the views of the church, which is very interesting since it's been studying this for about 2,000 years, is pretty clear and pretty well founded within an ethical basis on truth. And you may be surprised by that statement. So you'll have to come back and see exactly where we go, because this is a very complex